Here's a faithful English translation of your text. Ukraine struggles as China gets stuck in a showdown with Russia. Ukraine warns of something terrible engulfing the entire territory. Music, Mr. Zelensky warns of plunging many Russian regions into darkness. Music, Russia launches a large-scale offensive sweeping through the Dnipro Bop. Music, tensions rise within Israel after a ceasefire deal with Hamas. Greetings to all of you watching the World Update. In the next few minutes, we'll run through the latest international developments, from politics and economics to the standout current affairs stories across the continents. Right now, let's turn to the events drawing global attention. According to Politico Europe, Ukraine's UAV, unmanned aerial vehicle, manufacturers are running at full capacity to meet battlefield demand. But ramping up output depends on a fragile supply chain dominated by China. This reality reveals a significant vulnerability not only for KF but also a potential future difficulty for the US and its allies. If China tightens exports, Ukraine's UAV production could be paralyzed, threatening KF's defense capability. Therefore, Ukrainian companies are striving to develop domestic equipment and source from the US and Europe to reduce reliance on China. Even though costs are 3 to 5 times higher. A report by the Institute of Intelligence also warns that Ukraine's supply chain bottlenecks mirror those in NATO programs, which are almost entirely dependent on Beijing. Chinese magnets and chips that control Ukraine's UAVs also appear inside the radars and armored vehicles of allied countries. Such leverage could allow China to tighten exports, slow deliveries, or completely restrict access, forcing Western production to halt. Meanwhile, U.S. President Donald Trump said Washington and NATO allies are increasing pressure to end the conflict in Ukraine. Specifically, in a meeting with Finnish President Alexander Stubb, when asked whether he plans to increase pressure on Russia to reach a peace deal for Ukraine, U.S. President Donald Trump said he already is. Together with NATO, Trump said, "We're ramping up the pressure. All of us are ramping up the pressure. NATO is fantastic. We are selling a lot of weapons to NATO and I guess much of it will go to Ukraine. That depends on them, but they are buying weapons from the US. We make the best weapons in the world." The US president believes both Ukraine and Russia will soon sit at the negotiating table. He stated, "This is a terrible war, the worst since World War II. We have many reasons for them to do it. And I think they will soon sit down to negotiate." In addition, when asked whether Washington plans to impose additional sanctions on Russia, the U.S. leader replied, "I might." The White House chief expressed, "We have a lot of troops in Europe. As you know, many. And we can shift a bit but essentially not. We will maintain the forces as they are." The MiG-31 was the world's first fighter equipped with a passive electronically scanned array, PESA, radar, capable of tracking 24 targets simultaneously and engaging 6 at once. The MiG-31K variant was modified by Russia to carry the Kinzhal hypersonic missile with a range of 2.000 kilometers and a maximum speed of over 12.000 kilometers per hour. Early on October 10, Ukraine's Air Force said air raid sirens blared across Ukraine after a MiG-31K carrying a Kinzhal hypersonic ballistic missile took off. Specifically, at 4:52 a.m., air raid alerts were issued in many regions of Ukraine. A red alert from Ukraine's Air Force warned that the entire country was under missile threat. The takeoff of a MiG-31K from Savlyka airfield was recorded. In reality, the MiG-31 itself is not overly frightening. It debuted more than 40 years ago. Even after upgrades, it's considered relatively outdated. What Ukraine fears is the razor-sharp dagger, the Kinzhal hypersonic missile mounted on it. 1 minute of flight by a Russian MiG-31K is 1 minute of anxiety for Ukraine because it cannot know whether it will launch a missile or at what target. With a range of over 2.000 kilometers, the Kinzhal can cover all of Ukraine. So every time a MiG-31K takes off, the entire country must go on alert. Ukraine has no effective interceptors because the Kinzhal has stealth features. At hypersonic speed, Mach 10, 10 times the speed of sound, the Kinzhal needs only minutes to strike. Detecting and devising a response to the Kinzhal is almost impossible at present. Ukrainian Air Force spokesman Colonel Yuriy Inat acknowledged concern about Russian MiG-31 flights and affirmed the threat is real. He stressed that the Kh-47M2 Kinzhal on the MiG-31K can reach any point in our territory. Meanwhile, Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Mikhail Galin accused Moldova of seeking to turn the former Soviet republic into a logistics hub for Ukraine. Speaking to Izvestia, Deputy Minister Galin criticized Moldova's military strategy. He alleged, "We regard Moldova's 2025 to 2035 military strategy, approved by its government, as another step toward militarizing the country, bringing it closer to NATO and turning it into a supply base for Ukraine." Without citing evidence, he claimed this seems to be what the West is actively promoting under the banner of Moldova's integration with the Western Bloc. He accused the strategy of being oriented against Russia. He added that year by year, the volume of NATO-supplied weapons to Moldova is increasing. Moldovan troops regularly participate in multinational exercises with alliance countries both inside and outside their territory. Moldova has not commented on the senior Russian diplomat's accusation. Relations between Moldova and Russia have grown tense as the Chisinau government pursues a pro-Western line and accuses Moscow of trying to destabilize the country. Russia has repeatedly denied such claims. Moscow has also warned that Western efforts to pull Moldova into its orbit could lead to instability like in Ukraine after the 2014 Maidan events. Ukraine has just carried out one of its largest UAV attacks since the start of the conflict, causing thousands of Russians in the border province of Bengo to lose power. President Volodymyr Zelensky threatened to cut electricity to the Mengaro and CGA regions if widespread blackouts continue in Ukraine. At a press conference on October 8, Zelensky said attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure largely originate from two border regions, Belgorod and C. Zelensky vowed to respond in kind by targeting Belgorod and C, causing those areas to lose power. He warned that one of the directions from which Ukraine is attacked most heavily is toward Belgorod. Perhaps people in Belgorod will no longer feel comfortable if Russia continues to act this way. That is entirely fair. If they want to knock out our power, we will do the same to Belgorod and C. Zelensky added that Russian civilians are not Ukraine's targets. Ukrainian forces are accused of regularly striking civilian infrastructure in Russia. 3 people were injured in recent Ukrainian drone attacks in Belgorod. The attacks also caused blackouts affecting nearly 40,000 residents. Moscow previously accused Kiev of attacking nuclear facilities in the Sea and Smolensk regions of western Russia. Russia's defense ministry last weekend confirmed a massive strike on Ukraine's military-industrial facilities and energy infrastructure supporting Ukraine's operations. Ukraine's energy ministry later said the attack caused blackouts in several areas, including Sumy, Kharkiv, Odessa, and Lvp. A few days earlier, Kiev also announced it would intensify strikes on targets inside the opponent's territory, specifically oil infrastructure, to retaliate for Moscow's daily attacks on cities and energy infrastructure across Ukraine. Those strikes at times left millions in Ukraine without electricity, living in bitter cold. The campaign has pushed some regions in Russia into fuel shortages in recent months and driven up gasoline prices there by targeting the opponent's energy infrastructure. Kiev appears to want to cut revenue and fuel supplies for Moscow's military operations. According to Ukraine's military, from January to May this year, Kiev's strikes directly inflicted more than $1.3 billion in damage to Russia's refining and energy production sectors, with indirect damage estimated at least $9.5 billion, including losses from logistics disruptions, supply chain instability, and forced shutdowns. Music. Ukrinform reported that Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said Russian troops were ordered to attack Ukrainian positions toward the city of Pos in Don province, at any cost. He said he had approved operations aimed at weakening Russia's military potential. However, Denis Pushilin, the Russian-appointed head of Donetsk, said Ukraine had deployed reserve units to Pos to halt the Russian advance and was counter-attacking in the area. Pushilin added that Russian forces there are steadfastly holding the positions they have gained, including around Dobropilya, while trying to expand control. Russian troops are trying to consolidate positions as Ukraine attempts to dislodge them. In addition, according to the White Unit Observer channel, the Russian army made a strange move by suddenly redeploying 4 brigades from the POS front to concentrate on breaking through to the Dnipropetrovsk area. It seems Moscow's command has identified a very favorable attack axis worth the risk. Russia is shifting forces to intensify the offensive in the Dnipropetrovsk area. Sources from KF, citing Ukrainian military analysts, said 4 mechanized infantry brigades, 35th, 55th, 74th, and 137th of Russia's Central Operational Group, were reportedly redeployed simultaneously near Novopka. Previously these units were stationed south of Poks. This means Ukraine's counterattacks to save Pokros have completely failed and the Russian army is mopping up the area. Meanwhile, 3 combined arms armies are advancing rapidly westward, pushing deep into Dnipropetrovsk and Zaporizhia, facing weak resistance from Ukrainian forces. The command sees an opportunity to deliver a decisive blow. For their part, officials in multiple Ukrainian localities said Russian forces attacked settlements in several regions. In Kherson province, Ukraine accused Russia of striking the central district with UAVs, injuring 2 civilians. In the Dnipropetrovsk province, Russian forces shelled and used UAV munitions against the Nikopon and Shinlikop districts, causing fires and damage to civilian infrastructure. In Cchip province, Russia attacked the town of Nin with UAVs, damaging many homes and a polyclinic. In Sumy province, Russian forces attacked a residential area, sparking fires that damaged 2 apartment blocks. Music. On October 9, 2 Russian telegram channels, Vovoda Vase and Kirill Fedorov History Wands, reported that Ukraine used FP-5 Flamingo cruise missiles to attack. However, neither channel specified how many missiles were used, launch times, or target locations, only providing illustrative images. Notably, also on October 9, Ukrinform quoted President Zelensky as saying Ukraine last week simultaneously deployed Flamingo and Neptune missiles with maximum ranges of 1.000 to 3.000 kilometers to strike targets inside Russia. Zelensky said, "We are not saying this pair of missiles is being used widely. Only that they have been used and have achieved some initial concrete results." But did not specify numbers, targets, or timing. Earlier, on the 29th, Ukraine said it fired 4 Neptune missiles at the Elektronalo plant, an enterprise producing electronics for military and industrial purposes, in Russia's Bryansk province, but did not mention using Flamingo. Zelensky said Ukraine's deep strike raids inside Russia have achieved positive results, citing the Palion Nizhya drone plane hybrid, now being used to attack Russian ammunition depots. Another drone plane hybrid, Ruda, reportedly hit a sea tower for the first time. Long-range Ukrainian-made UAVs like LTI have managed to strike Russia's key oil export facilities at USA and Prim. Zelensky emphasized that what has happened is truly a major success. Meanwhile, according to Russia Today, RT, speaking to reporters in DANB Tayastan on October 9, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said Ukraine appears uninterested in a peaceful solution to the conflict with Russia because it believes it can still reverse the situation on the front. Peskov stressed Ukraine's decision-making is driven by the fanciful hope that something will change the situation at the front and create positive momentum. Kyiv's authorities are clearly inspired by European countries, which are in no way oriented toward any peace process. Moscow has long accused Ukraine's government of dragging out peace talks and showing no real interest in ending the conflict. In September, Peskov said that although both sides agreed in Istanbul to set up working groups to seek a potential peace deal, Ukraine unilaterally suspended all dialogue. He also said Kyiv's public communication strategy seems focused on making ever-changing proposals while ignoring Russia's practical negotiation offers. Meanwhile, Ukrainian officials continue to declare the intention to regain all territory, ambitions many military experts deem unrealistic without NATO's direct involvement. The Cost recently quoted Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky as revealing that during a meeting in New York on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly 2 weeks ago, U.S. President Donald Trump seemed open to Ukraine's request for Tomahawk cruise missiles. A shift from previous rejections by Washington. Speaking to the press, Zelensky said Trump's recent remarks signal a potential change. According to Ukraine's state news agency Ukrinform, Zelensky told reporters that President Trump may give Ukraine some of the things we discussed, some long-range capabilities that are very important to us. He added, "We first raised this in the fall of last year in New York when Trump was still campaigning. In the most recent meeting, I didn't hear anyone say no. I know they will work at the technical level and consider this possibility." The Ukrainian leader said he had previously raised Tomahawk transfers with the White House under Joe Biden but was refused. Zelensky said now there is a significant signal to strengthen Ukraine by every possible means. And Tomahawk is one of them. These systems can strengthen Ukraine and make the Russians sober up a bit and sit down at the negotiating table. Earlier, the Cost cited a report by the Institute for the Study of War, ISW, that nearly 2,000 Russian Federation military sites would be within range of Ukrainian forces if Washington approves transferring long-range Tomahawks. The US-based think tank noted the extended-range variant could reach about 2.500 kilometers, 1.553 miles, putting at least 1.945 Russian military targets within range. A shorter-range variant with roughly 1.600 kilometers, 994 miles, could reach about 1.655 targets. ISW's listed locations include a large UAV equipment plant in the Alabuga industrial zone in Tatarstan and numerous military airfields. The report also states there are 76 Russian air bases the extended-range missile could reach, compared to 67 for the standard version. Engels 2 Air Base, home to Russia's strategic bombers, is among the targets within Tomahawk range. Analysts argue Tomahawks would enable Ukraine to strike deep into Russia's rear and damage logistics supporting frontline operations, capabilities that could significantly disrupt Russia's war effort. George Barros, a Russia analyst at ISW, told the K that Ukraine's operational need is to hit the Russian Federation's intermediate and deep rear. While domestically available long-range weapons exist, they often lack the payload needed for effective strikes. Tomahawks would directly fill this gap by giving KFA key means to counter Russia's large-scale UAV campaign occurring every few days and involving over 500 Shahed drones. Barros noted that with Tomahawks, Ukraine could destroy the Tatarstan plant capable of producing 2.700 drones a month, ultimately degrading Russia's frontline and near-rear logistics by destroying support sources. For his part, President Vladimir Putin warned that transferring Tomahawks to Kyiv would mark a completely new level of escalation between the US and Russia. Music. Commenting on RealClearDefense.com, William C. Ney, a senior fellow at RAND and professor of policy analysis at the RAND School of Public Policy, and a former U.S. ambassador to Kazakhstan and Russia, argued that Ukraine, now increasingly vital to defending NATO's eastern flank, seeks a long-term, deep defense relationship with the U.S. This relationship is expected to go beyond training and arms supply, moving toward cooperation similar to what the U.S. has with other strategically significant middle powers, notably Poland and South Korea. C. Ney notes that since the full-scale conflict with Russia erupted in 2022, Ukraine's value to U.S. security has risen significantly. If Russia defeats Ukraine, the credibility of U.S. and NATO security commitments could erode. In reality, Ukraine continues strong resistance. Russian forces have made only minor gains in eastern Ukraine. Kyiv has denied Russia air superiority and succeeded in constraining Moscow's Black Sea Fleet. NATO allies are quickly learning from Ukraine's remarkable battlefield innovations. Based on this performance, Ukraine has grounds to argue its current defense relationship with the U.S. should be strengthened. In some respects, the U.S.-Ukraine defense relationship has deepened. Beyond security assistance and intelligence sharing, the U.S. has provided Ukraine with over $67 billion in military aid since 2022. The provision of Patriot missile defense systems and satellite intelligence sharing gives capabilities that no other NATO ally has received. This intelligence sharing has boosted Ukraine's ability to strike military targets beyond the front. However, alliance treaty aspects and on-the-ground presence are areas where other U.S. partners have deeper ties than Ukraine. Treaty example: the U.S.-South Korea alliance is essential to maintaining the armistice with North Korea. Presence example: the U.S. has over 28,000 troops in South Korea and a smaller number in Poland. Recently, Ukraine has shown skill integrating advanced U.S. military gear, like Poland and South Korea operating Patriot systems. Ukraine uses them too, while Poland and South Korea have used or purchased F-35 stealth fighters. Ukraine is building its air force around F-16s and lacks resources to upgrade to F-35s. Ukraine may also soon receive U.S. long-range air-launched strike missiles, a cost-effective cruise missile for distant targets. Moreover, Ukraine leads in two areas Western militaries are striving to learn. First, drones. Western forces are trying to catch up with Ukraine's development of accurate, low-cost attack UAVs. The Spider Web campaign, a smart strike on airfields across Russia, shows Ukraine has mastered this tech. Second, high-intensity combat experience. Ukraine's infantry is experienced and flexible. It's twice the size of South Korea's and nearly 3 to 4 times that of others. Such capable forces could accelerate Ukraine's NATO accession. CNA concludes that the substantial U.S.-Ukraine defense relationship is relatively new and will take years to develop, unlike the decades-long deep ties with South Korea and Poland. Still, Ukraine's strong defense against Russia's onslaught will drive Kyiv to seek a deeper defense relationship with the U.S., serving both sides' long-term interests. Music. The election winner in the Czech Republic, billionaire Andrej Babis, reaffirmed his campaign pledge that Prague will stop funding military supplies for Kyiv. RT reported that Babis, who just won parliamentary elections, again asserted Prague will not use state funds to supply weapons to Kyiv according to RT. The statement came as Babis began talks to form a new government after his right-wing Onyo party won the weekend's parliamentary elections. Amid coalition talks, Babis reiterated opposition to using the national budget to fund arms for Ukraine. Speaking in Prague, Babis declared, "We will not allocate even a single crown from the budget to buy weapons for Ukraine." After rejecting budget-funded military aid, he clarified that Czech arms companies would still be allowed to export to Ukraine. RT noted that under outgoing PM Petr Fiala, the Czech Republic was one of Ukraine's strongest supporters, launching an international ammunition initiative. About 3.5 million large-caliber rounds were provided to Ukraine under the program, purchased from unnamed third countries, with Germany among the financiers. Babis called on NATO to take over the Czech ammunition initiative, signaling a potential shift in how Prague supports Ukraine's war effort. Regarding support for Ukraine, right after preliminary results were announced on the evening of October 4, a reporter from Ukraine's Suspiln asked the Onyo leader if he would support Kyiv's EU accession should he again become Czech PM. The election winner replied, "You're not ready for the EU. We need to end the war first. Of course we can cooperate with Ukraine, but you are not ready to join the EU." Meanwhile, last week, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky urged speeding up accession talks with Brussels, telling EU leaders that, "We need substantive progress." Moscow, while firmly opposed to Ukraine joining NATO, does not oppose its EU membership, seeing it as an economic bloc rather than a military alliance. In September, Russian President Vladimir Putin stated Ukraine had set the goal of joining the EU. "I repeat, that is Ukraine's lawful choice, how they wish to build international relations." Babis has begun preliminary coalition talks with two right-wing parties, Freedom and Direct Democracy, SPD, and the Motorist Party. Currently, Onyo holds 80 of 200 lower house seats, with support from the two smaller parties. A potential coalition would have a 108-seat majority. President Petr Pavel announced the newly elected parliament will hold its first session on November X. According to KF, flight tracking data shows a US RC-135U reconnaissance aircraft took off from the UK early on the 0th. Flew over the Baltic states. Then circled Kaliningrad, western Russia bordering Poland, during a 7-hour mission amid rising NATO-Moscow tensions. The aircraft departed RAF Mildenhall in Suffolk, southeast England, at 8:32 a.m., headed for the Baltics and Kaliningrad before returning to the UK at 3:36 p.m. This aircraft is specially designed to collect electronic intelligence on adversary radar and communication systems. It also has aerial refueling capability, giving it near unlimited range. Kaliningrad, a small exclave on the Baltic Sea, is strategically vital for Moscow and has been a focal point of geopolitical tensions since the Ukraine conflict erupted in 2022. Nestled between Poland and Latvia, both NATO members, the area hosts Russia's Baltic Fleet and advanced missile systems. The U.S. Recon mission followed a recent uptick in alleged Russian hybrid warfare incidents across Europe, notably suspicious UAV activity and airspace violations. The appearance of a UAV at Munich airport forced dozens of flights to divert or cancel on the 0th, affecting over 10,000 passengers. German Chancellor Fred M. said he believes Russia is behind many of these incidents, though he stressed no UAVs were weaponized and they appeared to be reconnaissance flights. In September, Poland said over 20 suspected Russian drones violated its airspace. An unprecedented incident. Polish PM Donald Tusk warned it was the closest we've come to open conflict since World War II. Although the purpose of the October 0th flight has not been officially confirmed. Flight Radar 24 reported that the aircraft, callsign Jake 37, also orbited Kaliningrad on the 0th, coinciding with UAV intrusions that disrupted Munich airport. A plot to attack politicians, including the Belgian Prime Minister, was thwarted. During home searches, police found improvised explosive devices and indications the group planned to use drones for the attack. On October 9, Belgian judicial authorities announced the arrest of 3 young men in Antwerp suspected of planning an Islamist-inspired terror attack on politicians using drones. Federal prosecutor Anne Frannon said the suspects, born in 2001, 2002, and 2007, planned to attack PM De Wever and others. She said the group sought to build a drone capable of carrying explosives. Police searched multiple locations, including a home just a few hundred meters from the Prime Minister's residence. At the first suspect's home, authorities found an improvised device capable of becoming a bomb and a bag of metal ball bearings. At the second suspect's home, police seized a 3D printer possibly used to produce parts for the attack. Of the 3 suspects, 2 are being questioned and will appear before a judge on October 10. The third has been released. Commenting on the case, Deputy PM Maxime Prevat wrote on X that news of a planned attack on PM De Wever shocked many people. This shows we face a very real terror threat and must remain vigilant. He added Belgium is actively strengthening its response to new forms of terrorism, especially the use of drones for malicious purposes. Justice Minister Annelies Verlinden said the October 9 police operation may have successfully prevented a large-scale terror attack planned for the same day. Defense Minister Theo Franken also voiced support for PM De Wever and his family. This is not the first time De Wever has been threatened. In April, the Antwerp Appeals Court jailed 5 people, with the ringleader receiving 6 years, for a 2023 assassination plot when De Wever was still Antwerp's mayor. In October, after U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth fired Navy Chief of Staff Harrison, a rumor spread claiming U.S. authorities had arrested the former Navy official on suspicion of treason. For example, one ex-user posted that investigators from the Navy JAG's General Counsel had arrested a senior Navy officer on the 0th at his luxury home near the Washington Navy Yard after Secretary of War Pete Hegseth fired him for incompetence. The post cited Raw News, which claimed Harrison was arrested as a traitor and had refused interrogation or a polygraph. Fact checks by Snopes on October 8 said the rumor originated from Raw News, a website dedicated to humorous and satirical content. Its About page states content is for information, education, and entertainment, and the site contains humorous and satirical material, a disclaimer to protect it legally. This fictional story spread after Politico reported Hegseth fired Harrison, appointed by President Donald Trump in May 2025 as part of a Pentagon restructuring effort. Previously, Harrison and Navy Secretary John Fan supported Hegseth's internal reforms, including canceling many external consultancy contracts and reassigning advisory staff. However, according to defense sources, personnel and internal control disputes between Hegseth's team and civilian advisors led to the dismissal. Harrison had been appointed in 2020 by President Trump to head the Arctic Research Commission. He also pushed U.S. strategic interest in the Arctic, including proposing buying Greenland and exploiting energy in the region. Observers see the move as consolidating Hegseth's power within the Pentagon and paving the way for President Trump's allies to tighten control over energy policy in the Arctic and naval strategy, priorities identified by the White House. The Trump administration proposed banning Chinese airlines from flying over Russian airspace on flights to and from the U.S. The new move aims to reduce disadvantages for U.S. carriers amid escalating trade tensions with Beijing. Washington says this would create a level playing field for U.S. airlines, which suffer because they cannot fly over Russia. U.S. carriers have long criticized China's access to Russian airspace because it shortens flight times, saves fuel, and lowers costs, while U.S. airlines must take longer routes, raising costs and cutting profits. The U.S. Department of Transportation asserts this disparity has become a major competitive factor harming U.S. airlines. The proposal requires Chinese carriers to respond within 2 days and could take effect as early as November. If enacted, it would affect Air China, China Eastern, Xiamen Airlines, and China Southern. Russia currently bans U.S. and some foreign airlines from its airspace in retaliation for Washington barring Russian flights to the U.S. in May 2022 after Moscow launched its military plan in Ukraine. In May 2023, the U.S. allowed more flights by Chinese airlines after Beijing agreed not to fly over Russia on new routes. Last year, the U.S. allowed Chinese carriers to increase to 50 round trips per week between the two countries. Pre-COVID, each side operated over 150 weekly round trips. The new move comes as U.S.-China economic ties strain, alongside news that Boeing is negotiating to sell up to 500 aircraft to China. Conversely, Beijing tightened controls on rare earths, for the first time expanding export restrictions beyond its borders to include products made abroad using Chinese rare earth materials or technology. Analysts see this as Beijing's strategic gambit in trade talks with the U.S., leveraging advantages ahead of a planned Trump-Xi summit in South Korea at the end of October. Trade tensions escalated in April after the Trump administration unveiled reciprocal tariffs. Retaliations pushed U.S. tariffs on Chinese imports above 100% at times before a truce effective through mid-November. On October 9, a federal judge in Chicago, Apron Perry, temporarily blocked President Donald Trump's decision to deploy hundreds of National Guard troops in Illinois. After more than 2 hours of arguments between federal government lawyers and Illinois attorneys, Judge Perry assessed that deploying the Guard in Chicago would only pour fuel on the fire. She said a full written ruling would be issued on October 10. Earlier, U.S. Northern Command announced about 500 National Guard members had arrived in the Chicago area to maintain law and order for an initial 60-day deployment. 5 days earlier, another federal judge blocked a similar Trump deployment order in Portland, Oregon. However, on October 9, a 3-judge panel at the Ninth Circuit in San Francisco seemed likely to overturn that ruling, opening the door to deploying hundreds of troops in Portland. The outcomes in the two cases could have significant implications for Trump's expanding campaign to send troops to U.S. cities despite opposition from Democratic-led local authorities. Government lawyers in both courts argued the Guard is necessary to protect federal officers and property from protesters. Meanwhile, the governors of Illinois and Oregon criticized the administration for portraying largely small and peaceful protests as violent and dangerous to justify deploying the Guard. On October 9, Trump hinted he would continue plans to deploy the Guard to cities. He said, in the cabinet meeting, "We are directly confronting the threats of terrorism and domestic violence. Beyond the Guard, the U.S. government has deployed more federal agents to many cities to detain illegal immigrants." Relatedly, The Dian reported on October 10 that the U.S. government reassigned many FBI agents to help with immigration raids. 45% of FBI agents at the 25 largest field offices were tasked with prioritizing support for the Department of Homeland Security in detaining migrants. Democratic Senator Mark Vanner raised concerns this would reduce FBI personnel devoted to counterintelligence, anti-smuggling, counter-terrorism, and cyberattacks. Music. On October 9, President Donald Trump said his administration plans to use the current federal government shutdown to permanently eliminate some Democratic-favored programs. As the Senate remains unable to pass a stopgap budget bill, it's unclear which programs he meant. But Trump told a cabinet meeting at the White House that they are very popular among Democrats but, frankly, not favored by Republicans. He continued blaming Democrats for the shutdown and warned they would taste their own policies. The threat came a week after he first floated punishing his political rivals during the shutdown. Now 9 days long, last week on social media, Trump said the budget shortfall gave him an unprecedented chance to cut Democratic agencies. He said he would meet Director Russell to identify items to cut. On day one of the shutdown, he announced the administration was freezing about $18 billion for New York City infrastructure and canceling about $8 billion for climate programs in Democratic-leaning states. 2 days later, officials said $2.1 billion for Chicago transportation projects was suspended. The administration is also considering canceling another $12 billion allocated for clean energy projects. The shutdown began October 1 after congressional leaders failed to pass spending bills to keep the government operating when the fiscal year ended. Republicans won a temporary bill to maintain current spending through November 21. While Democrats say any funding bill must include additional health protections, both proposals repeatedly failed Senate votes. On October 9, 2 funding bills that could have ended the shutdown again failed on the 7th round of votes. The Senate rejected the Republican bill to fund the government through November 21 by 54-5 for failing to reach the 60-vote threshold. As before, 3 Democrats, John Fetterman, PA, Catherine Cortez Masto, NV, and Angus King, ME, voted with Republicans. Conversely, Republican Rand Paul, KY, voted with Democrats against his party's bill. Republicans, who hold a narrow Senate majority, need about 8 Democratic votes to pass the short-term bill. The Senate the same day also rejected the Democratic bill, 47-50. Venezuela has formally requested an emergency UN Security Council meeting to protest U.S. military deployments in the Caribbean. On Telegram, Foreign Minister Ivan stressed U.S. missile destroyers, fighter jets, special forces, and nuclear submarines near Venezuela's coast threaten peace in Latin America and the Caribbean. The letter to the Security Council lists economic, trade, and financial coercive measures Washington has applied over the past decade, and asserts the deployments violate the Tlatelolco Treaty. Caracas denounced the counter-narcotics narrative as false, saying over 87% of drugs entering the U.S. come from the Pacific coast, not the Caribbean. It also accused the U.S. of attacking civilian vessels in international waters, turning sailors into victims of extrajudicial executions. The move comes amid heightened tensions after the U.S. offered a $50 million reward for information leading to the arrest of President Nicolas Maduro, whom the White House accuses of leading the cartel of the L. In response to Venezuela's proposal, Russia and China, diplomats said, pushed for a Security Council meeting to discuss U.S.-Venezuelan tensions. Days earlier, President Trump scrapped diplomatic efforts for a deal with Venezuela, opening the door to potential military escalation against alleged narco-traffickers or President Maduro's regime. Richard Grenell, Trump's special envoy and head of the Kennedy Center, oversaw talks with Maduro and senior Venezuelan officials during a meeting with top military leaders. Trump phoned Grenell to order an end to all diplomatic outreach, including talks with Maduro. Trump has grown frustrated by Maduro's refusal to relinquish power voluntarily and by Venezuelan officials' consistent denial of narco-trafficking. U.S. officials revealed the administration drafted multiple military plans for escalation scenarios, including forcing Maduro from power. Secretary of State Kim and National Security Advisor Marco Rubio called Maduro an illegitimate leader and repeatedly accused him of narco-trafficking. On the evening of October 8, the French presidency said President Emmanuel Macron would appoint a new prime minister within 48 hours, by the evening of October 11 at the latest. Macron is racing to find a new PM within 2 days after Sébastien Lecondo resigned, plunging the country deeper into political crisis. If the appointee is a new face, it will be the 6th prime minister of Macron's presidency. In a TV interview, the outgoing PM Leonu said he expected a new PM to be appointed to address the crisis rather than holding early elections or Macron organizing them. He said this is not the time to change the president and that Macron should serve out his term to 2027. In his view, France now needs a more technocratic government and a team determined to roll up their sleeves and solve problems until the presidential election. Anyone becoming PM will face the same issues as Lecondo and his predecessors Martin Banner and Frank Sabourin. Lecondo resigned after the opposition and some allies threatened a no-confidence vote, signaling deep instability affecting France. After losing the majority in 2022 and further seats in the snap 2024 election, Macron's centrist bloc had to ally with the right-wing Republicans but still holds only a minority in parliament. Thus any PM risks being toppled if the left unites with Marine Le Pen's far-right National Rally. Le Pen said she would not join any deal, calling for early parliamentary elections. "I will criticize all of it, enough. The joke has gone on long enough." MP Jean-Luc Mélenchon of the far left insisted the only way out is Macron's resignation. After meeting Lecondo, Socialist leader Olivier F. and Green leader Marine Condorcet said the left wants to run the next government. In France, the president, elected every 5 years, is head of state responsible for foreign and defense policy. The PM, appointed by the president after parliamentary elections, usually from the majority party, handles domestic policy and daily government work. Cabinet members are proposed by the PM and must be approved by the president. Speaking at the Russia Central Asia Summit in Dushanbe, Tajikistan, President Vladimir Putin said Moscow is working closely with Tehran to reduce tensions around Iran's nuclear program. Russia also wants to help restore constructive cooperation between Iran and the IAEA. Putin emphasized that Israel relies on Russia's partnership with Iran to send messages to Tehran's leadership. He said, "We continue to maintain reliable communication channels with Israel and have received signals from Israeli leaders asking us to convey to our Iranian friends that Israel is also committed to de-escalation and does not want confrontation in any form." He stressed diplomacy as the only way to address issues related to Iran's nuclear program. According to the Kremlin, earlier this week Putin spoke by phone with Israeli PM Benjamin Netanyahu. They discussed resolving the Gaza conflict, U.S. President Donald Trump's peace proposals, Iran's nuclear program, and stability in Syria. After recent Israel-Iran escalations, Russia offered to help establish dialogue between the sides. In July, Putin told Netanyahu Moscow was ready to contribute in every possible way to seeking a negotiated solution on Iran's nuclear issue. Putin is among the few world leaders in direct contact with both Israel and Iran after the first exchange of strikes in June, trying to cool tensions. At that time, Israel and Iran carried out mutual airstrikes over 12 days. Moscow also put forward several compromise proposals. Meanwhile, leaked information from Moscow indicates Iran is preparing to receive up to 48 Su-35 fighters, a deal that could alter the regional airpower balance. Newly leaked classified Russian government documents revealed major export plans by its defense industry, including delivering 48 Su-35s to re-equip Iran's air force, along with 14 Su-34 bombers and two fifth-generation Su-57 fighters for Algeria. Regional observers say Tehran's move comes as the Middle East power balance shifts after its strategic ally Syria was toppled in December by armed groups backed by Turkey, Israel, and the West. Iran faces a dense military encirclement by the US and allies. Experts believe that if the 48 Su-35s are commissioned on schedule, Iran will, for the first time in over 4 decades, possess a modern air force capable of meeting any high-intensity conflict scenario. Before a cabinet meeting where PM Netanyahu was to approve a Gaza ceasefire plan, Israel's National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir warned his Jewish Power Party would seek to topple the government if Hamas is not dismantled. He said that if Hamas is not dissolved, or if they merely tell us it has been while it continues under another guise, Jewish power will dissolve the government. On October 9, Ben-Gvir declared he would vote against the ceasefire and hostage deal proposed by the US because Israel would release hundreds of Palestinian prisoners under it. He wrote on X that while everyone's hearts rejoice at hostages returning, we absolutely must not ignore the price. Thousands of terrorists, including 250 murderers, are expected to be released. This price is unbearable. On October 9, Israel and Hamas signed a ceasefire and hostage release deal, the first phase of President Donald Trump's initiative to end the 2-year war. The same day, Trump said he would travel to Israel to witness the hostage exchange under the plan to end the Israel-Hamas conflict. As Netanyahu's security cabinet met to approve the agreement, Hamas's chief negotiator also announced a deal to end the conflict, seen as a major breakthrough after months of failed efforts to end a 2-year war that devastated Gaza, killed tens of thousands, shook the entire Middle East. Trump said in the Oval Office that hostages would be released on October 13 or 14. "I hope to be there." He also hinted he might address Israel's Knesset. Though Israelis and Palestinians took to the streets in celebration, many worry whether the deal will hold. Earlier, Israel's Deputy Foreign Minister Sarel H. Ken said a ceasefire had taken effect. However, the IDF the same day announced a strike on a Hamas armed group in northern Gaza. 2 senior U.S. officials said the deal would unfold in 2 phases, first hostage releases, then a near-permanent ceasefire. Big issues would then be handled, including disarmament, forming a new Gaza administration, and Israel's redeployment. Officials acknowledged risks, but Trump hoped to revive and expand the Abraham Accords, normalization deals between Israel and some Arab states from his first term. According to RT on October 9, President Putin said Russia is mediating between Israel and Iran, adding that Tel Aviv asked Moscow to help convey commitment to peace and avoiding confrontation. Speaking at the Russia Central Asia Summit in Dushanbe, he said Moscow is working closely with Tehran to reduce tensions around Iran's nuclear program, and wants to restore constructive cooperation between Iran and the IAEA. Putin noted Israel relies on Russia's partnership with Iran to relay messages. He said, "We maintain reliable channels with Israel and received signals asking us to tell our Iranian friends that Israel is committed to de-escalation and does not want confrontation in any form." Earlier this week, Putin phoned Netanyahu, citing the Kremlin. Sputnik reported they discussed Middle East developments in detail, including Trump's plan for Gaza normalization. Putin reaffirmed Russia's consistent stance supporting a comprehensive solution to the Palestinian issue based on widely recognized international legal grounds. They discussed negotiated solutions for Iran's nuclear program and further stabilization in Syria. Russia's foreign ministry also commented on Trump's Gaza peace plan. Spokeswoman Maria Zakharova said it's important that implementing the plan opens the door to resuming constructive dialogue between Israel and Palestine. She stressed Russia always calls for an immediate ceasefire and an end to bloodshed in Gaza. "We believe any measures and initiatives toward this deserve support. We hope the ceasefire will be sustainable and ultimately lead to long-term stability in Palestine. This will create the necessary conditions to launch comprehensive efforts to rebuild the region's infrastructure." nearly destroyed by the fighting. She said it's important that successful implementation paves the way for constructive dialogue on a comprehensive political solution based on international law, including establishing an independent Palestinian state living in peace and security alongside Israel. Palestinians and families of Israeli hostages showed unrestrained joy after hearing of a deal between Israel and Hamas to end the Gaza conflict and free all Israeli hostages in Gaza, where most of over 2 million people have been displaced by Israeli bombing. Young men clapped on devastated streets even as Israeli airstrikes continued in parts of the enclave. Abdul Mazid Rapo said in Khan Yunis in southern Gaza, "Thank God for the ceasefire that ends the bloodshed." Abdul expressed, "I'm not the only happy one. All of Gaza is happy. All Arabs, the whole world is happy with the ceasefire and end of bloodshed. Thank you and love to those who stood by us." At Kicker Conan in Tel Aviv, where families of those abducted in the Hamas attack 2 years earlier had gathered to demand their return, Einav Goker, the mother of a hostage, was overjoyed. In the glow of celebratory torches she said, "I can't breathe. I can't breathe. I can't describe my feelings. What should I say to my child? What should I do? Hug and kiss him," she added, referring to her son Matan. "Just tell him that his mother loves him. That's enough. And to see his eyes looking at me, that's relief." On October 8, Israel and Hamas agreed to the first phase of President Donald Trump's plan for the Palestinian territories, a ceasefire and hostage rescue that could open the door to ending a bloody 2-year war that has shaken the Middle East. Former hostage Setop said, "I have no words to describe that feeling." Just a day after the second anniversary of Hamas's cross-border attack that led to Israel's devastating offensive in Gaza, indirect talks in Egypt reached agreement on Phase 1 of Trump's 20-point plan. In Gaza, groups of young people on the streets applauded the news. People shouted, "Allahu Akbar," hoping the deal would end the conflict and let them return home. Tam Anbare, a businessman displaced from Gaza City, told Reuters via a chat app, "I can't stop laughing and crying. I can't believe we survived. We're eager to go home even if it's destroyed, to return to Gaza City. Sleep without fear of bombing. Try to rebuild our lives." However, some expressed despair that they cannot return because Israeli forces will remain. Zakia Bik, 58, a mother of 6, said, "Our house was one of the first destroyed. So even if the war ends, we'll still have to live in tents. Maybe for years until they rebuild Gaza, if the deal is implemented." Gaza's Hamas-run government media office urged people not to return home until deal details are officially announced and to stay away from areas Israel still controls. The IDF also warned northern Gaza residents not to return, saying on X it remains a dangerous combat zone. If fully implemented, the deal would bring the sides closer than any previous effort to avert a regional war that has drawn in neighbors, Iran, Lebanon, and Yemen, increasing Israel's isolation and changing the Middle East. Music. Israel's presidency said the U.S. president is expected in Jerusalem this weekend, while Hamas said Trump will officially declare the conflict over after hostages are freed. On October 9, the office of Israel's President Israel Hag announced his schedule for Sunday the 12th was cancelled. Events at the presidential residence in Jerusalem were cancelled due to the expected hostage release and the upcoming visit by U.S. President Donald Trump to Israel. AFP quoted the announcement citing stringent security measures in Jerusalem around the visit and historic developments in the coming days. The news followed Trump's statement that both Israel and Hamas had agreed to Phase 1, under which all hostages, living and deceased, will be returned to Israel very soon, and Israel's military will withdraw to the so-called Golden Buffer Line in Gaza. With the ceasefire, Hamas spokesman Hem Kashem urged countries to ensure Israel implements the deal's terms and that conflict never returns to Gaza. He stressed Hamas can guarantee the conflict will not resume after the exchange is completed. And, "We heard the U.S. president speak directly, publicly, and clearly on this. Trump said all Israeli hostages would be freed soon, possibly on October 13 or even sooner." Currently, Hamas holds 48 Israeli hostages, including at least 20 alive. Under the 20-point peace plan, Hamas will release them in exchange for 250 Palestinians serving life sentences and 1.700 Gazans held by Israel. Since the war began on October 0, 2023, Trump also said Israel would withdraw to a boundary agreed by both sides. A senior White House source told CBS News Israel's withdrawal from Gaza will occur within 24 hours after Tenvip approves the deal. After Israel withdraws, both sides will carry out the hostage prisoner exchange. Trump also said the U.S. is forming a peace council to sustain long-term peace, but gave no details on how it will operate. Under the 20-point plan, the council, led by Trump and international monitors, will oversee a non-political, technocratic Palestinian committee managing Gaza's daily affairs. Netanyahu called it a great day for Israel. Hamas confirmed signing the deal to end the Gaza war. Israel withdraws from Gaza. Aid flows in, and prisoners are exchanged. Hamas urged countries to force Israel to fully implement, not just delay or evade, the agreed terms. Music. A Hamas leader declared the war completely over, saying mediators and the U.S. confirmed a permanent ceasefire that includes releasing all Palestinian women and children held in Israeli prisons and reopening the Rafah crossing in both directions. Specifically, the Jalisabab newspaper reported the evening of October 9 that in a statement that day, Hamas leader Khalil al-Hayza stressed the war had fully ended and the Palestinian delegation received assurances from mediators and the U.S. He, head of Hamas's negotiating team, said Hamas offered a response serving the Palestinian people's interests and avoiding bloodshed, implying it is based on the U.S. peace plan. He stressed, "We affirm that our people's sacrifices will not be in vain and we remain steadfast in not abandoning national rights, achieving freedom, independence, and self-determination." He said Hamas will continue working with national and Islamic forces to realize an independent Palestinian state with Jerusalem as its capital. The ceasefire was announced early on October 9 after 4 days of indirect talks in Sharm el-Sheikh on the Red Sea, mediated by Turkey, Egypt, Qatar, and the U.S. On the 29th, U.S. President Donald Trump announced a 20-point plan for Gaza including freeing all Israeli hostages in exchange for about 2.000 Palestinian prisoners, a permanent ceasefire, and gradual withdrawal of Israeli forces from all of Gaza. Phase 2 calls for a new Gaza administration without Hamas, creation of a security force of Palestinians and troops from Arab and Muslim countries, and disarming Hamas. The plan also provides funding from Arab and Muslim states to support the new administration and Gaza's reconstruction, with limited involvement by the Palestinian Authority. Arab and Muslim countries welcomed the plan, but some officials said much remains to be discussed and negotiated for full implementation. Regarding Hamas's role and influence, Russia's Izvestia reported that public confidence in Hamas has weakened in Palestinian society on the second anniversary of October 7, 2023. Polls show fewer people believe Hamas's attack on Israel served national goals, and confidence in the group's success is quickly fading. Experts interviewed by Izvestia agreed this reflects growing public fatigue amid conflict. Surveys show 48% of Gaza residents support recent protests demanding Hamas relinquish power in the enclave. Palestinian expert Mohammed al-Masri believes the polls reflect reality, as Israel's response to Hamas's attack caused mass civilian casualties and widespread destruction. This does not mean Palestinians are abandoning resistance, but it raises doubts about Hamas's ability to achieve significant results in the current situation. Al-Masri noted Gaza's future will largely depend on implementing President Donald Trump's peace plan. Recently, the family of Thaksin Shinawat announced he had completed the first 30 days of his one-year sentence at Bangkok's Klong Prem Central Prison. His daughter Paetongtarn shared after a prison visit that his mental health remains good. "It's been a month," he said. His fingers feel numb. According to the Bangkok Post, Paetongtarn, her husband Nuttapong Kunakornwong, and Pitik Suwas, husband of former PM Paetongtarn Shinawat, spent over an hour visiting Thaksin in their latest trip. Nuttafong said Thaksin's mental health remains good and revealed some old classmates will visit him. Thaksin received the news gratefully. Earlier, Thai Justice Minister Rutphong Nar said Thaksin's pardon petition was reviewed and found not to meet legal criteria. But he declined details. Last month, Lieutenant Colonel Sean Kanhanaf, Deputy Chief of Corrections, said Thaksin was diagnosed with cervical spondylosis and sought care at a prison medical facility near the prison. However, no specialist was on duty at the time. Authorities arranged another appointment. According to Sean, Thaksin's overall health is normal. He can eat and function in prison, though some risks remain. Corrections Deputy Spokeswoman Kanwan Chuanfan said the former Thai PM shows some fatigue and body aches common in the elderly, but confirmed his condition is stable as he awaits a routine prison health check. Thaksin returned to Thailand in August 2023 after 15 years in self-exile. Upon return, he went to court and received an 8-year sentence. On the first night in prison, he was transferred to a hospital for health reasons and stayed there 6 months until the Thai king granted a pardon reducing his term to 1 year. However, on the 9th, a Thai court ruled his hospital time would not count toward his sentence. So the former PM had to return to prison to begin serving from the start.